And welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this hands-on session on VPC networking, I'm going to be keeping it pretty simple and high level. The reason being this is a cloud practitioner part of the pathway, so it's a foundation level. We don't need to get too involved in the nuts and bolts of VPC. But I want you to understand the basics around VPC, subnetting, route tables, network access control lists, all this sort of stuff, so that you understand the basics around it. And if you have problems, you can troubleshoot that yourself. So we get to here, obviously, by services and then VPC. And that will take us to the VPC dashboard, which will list all of our VPC components. We can see here now, we've already got a VPC. And the reason we've got a VPC is that AWS, for all new accounts, will create a default VPC in every single region. So if we click here on See All Regions, we can see that we have a default VPC already created for us in every region. We can also see here that we have subnets already created for us. And there are 6 subnets. The reason there are 6 subnets is that there is a default subnet in our default VPC for every single availability zone in that region. And so the North Virginia region has 6 availability zones, so there will be 6 subnets. So if we open that up, if I just do it in another screen, we will see here that we've got 6 subnets there. And we can see the availability zones that they're in, going to 1A all the way through to 1F. So there's 6 availability zones there. Now, just one thing about availability zones. So they've got an ID here. So we've got 1A, 1B, 1C. Now, that can change. And what I mean by that is that AWS try and balance the availability zones. So they're trying to make sure that they have the same amount of capacity or spare capacity in each availability zone. And so if everyone's selecting US East 1A, then US East 1A is going to get full very quickly. And so your US East 1A will be different to someone else's account's US East 1A. They're not necessarily the same. It depends on which availability zone is being more overloaded than the other, and then they'll change that for the next account. Okay, so we just jump back into the VPC management console again. Now we can also see that we've got a route table already defined for us, and we've got an internet gateway which has been attached to the default VPC. Now, if you remember from the lecture, we need to have an internet gateway attached to our VPC, and we need to have a route from our subnet through to that internet gateway. So let's have a look at that. So first of all, we'll have a look at the internet gateway. Okay, so there we can see that internet gateway, and it's attached to our default VPC. So let's have a look at the route. Okay, so there's our route table. We just click on it to expand it. Okay, what we've got there is a route. So we've got 2 entries here. The first one is for local traffic within our VPC. So this CIDR block here, and don't be too concerned if you don't understand what a CIDR block is, because that is associate level stuff. As a cloud practitioner, you don't need to know that. But that there will be the same as our VPC. So if we click on our VPC, we will see that 172.31.0.0 is the same here. So all traffic, local traffic in our VPC is allowed. Now we also have an internet gateway there, and we have traffic to the wider internet is allowed, or is it routed through to that internet gateway. And so we look at that, and we can see that that will be the internet gateway that is attached, or that is attached to our VPC. So we just open that up again. And then we can see, so that internet gateway, we have a route for the wider internet traffic to that internet gateway. But we also need to have an association between this route table and a subnet. And that way we can have a route from our internet gateway through to our subnet itself. And so if we look here on subnet associations, we can see that we have 6 subnet associations, and that is for the 6 subnets in each availability zone. So all traffic within any of those 6 subnets, those default subnets, will be routed, if they're for the wider internet, will be routed to that internet gateway. There is a note here that you do not have any subnet associations. So we haven't created our own specific subnet associations, but AWS has created these ones for us, and those have been implicitly associated for us. So just jumping back into the VPC dashboard. Now we also have a network access control list here. And so we can click on that and have a look at that. So again, we'll click on it to have a look at it. So we have inbound and outbound rules. And so that is allowing all traffic. Okay, so all traffic is allowed. And then we've got a wildcard here for denied. So anything that is not defined will be denied. So that is a peculiarity of network access control list. So by default, this will be here to deny everything. And so we have to specifically allow a rule to allow traffic in. So we have inbound and outbound rules. The reason we have inbound and outbound rules is because a network access control list is stateless. So just because a request comes in doesn't necessarily mean that the return is allowed back out again. So we need to define both inbound and outbound rules for that because it is stateless. Okay, so the best way to learn about this is to launch an instance and play around with it and see what happens. So if we click on Launch EC2 Instances here, that will take us to the EC2 console and it will automatically start the launch process for us. So I'll just click on that and there we go. We're jumping into the EC2 console and we'll select an AMI. So we'll select a Marketplace WordPress AMI. That will be fine. And continue. So I'm just going to race through this quite quickly because we've already launched a WordPress application in the past. We know how to do this. So I'm just going to select the free tier eligible one. Now let's have a look at this. So we didn't go too much into this when we launched a WordPress application before, but let's have a look at this. So we've got our VPC, and so we've only got one of them. So we've only got one to select from, and that is our default VPC. We can select a subnet to launch into. So I'm going to just select US East 1A, but it doesn't really matter. And auto assign a public IP. Now, if you remember, I'm going to do enable on here. If you remember, we need to have a public IP address for our EC2 server so that it can be found on the wider internet. If we don't have a public IP address, it cannot be found on the wider internet. Now, a placement group, that is just where we can launch instances into a high-speed group with high-speed network between them. We don't need to worry about that. Now, IAM role, if you remember in the IAM lab, we created a role for EC2. We could attach an IAM role here, but we won't worry about that now. We don't need that. And shutdown behavior, we'll just have stop. We won't worry about terminating it. Well, actually, we will terminate it, actually. And protect against accidental termination, we don't need to worry about anything there. So we'll leave everything as it is, and we'll go to add storage, and we'll leave that as it is again. We're going to add a tag, and just call it the name. And we're going to call this one public, or public IP. So this one's going to have a public IP address, and we're going to launch one that doesn't have a public IP address. Now we have a security group that has already been created for us by this AMI, or it's already defined within this AMI. So what we've got here is that, as you remember, a security group is associated to an instance. It operates at the instance level. It's a firewall that operates on that instance. It's unlike a network access control list that operates at the subnet level. Okay, so the first entry there we've got is SSH. So if we want to connect into this EC2 instance into the Linux operating system, we can do that through SSH. It's a little bit advanced right now, but we can do that if we would like to. And that will be on port 22. So normally if we're going to be connecting directly into this instance, we would select the source as being your IP. So you'd select my IP and it would lock it to your IP address. We also need to allow traffic coming in for HTTP because it is a website. So there we're allowing traffic, all traffic from the wider internet is going to be allowed. And also we've got SSH traffic here for port 443. And so that's what's going to be allowed in and allowed out, and nothing else will be allowed unless it's defined here in this security group. So let's review and launch. And launch. So I don't have a key pair, so I'm going to create a new key pair. And I'll make sure that I download that key pair. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to launch that instance. Okay, so that's just finished launching, and I'll just click on View Instances. And I'm going to create another instance, but this one's not going to have a public IP address. So again, we select the same one, we select the WordPress. Okay. We'll just very quickly go through this. Select one that's on the free tier. Okay, so I'm going to leave everything as it was before. I'll launch this one into maybe, I'll launch it into 1A as well. Now I'm going to disable assigning of a public IP address. So this won't have a public IP address, but other than that, it will be identical to the other one. So I'll leave that as it is. Add storage will be the same. I'll add a tag for this. And we're going to call this one no IP. We'll leave the security group exactly the same as the other one, and then we'll launch this one as well. Okay, so that one's launched. So we'll just give it a bit of time to wait for all these status checks to be done. And we'll just click on refresh to see how they're going. Okay, so they're pretty well up and running now, those two instances. So we've got here public IP and no IP. So if you remember, we defined a tag for name with a capital N. If you used lowercase n, it wouldn't have worked. But a capital N there, it will come up in this list here. So we've got here no IP and public IP. So this one with the public IP that we defined will have a public DNS. So if we just select that and have a look at it. And there we go. We've got our WordPress site up and running just the same as we had last time that we did it. And we've also got our public IP address here. So select that and go to it. The same thing again. But when we go to the one that doesn't have a public IP address, there's no public DNS and there's no public IP address. So there's no way of finding this on the wider internet. It's impossible to find it. So if we go to this private DNS and we try and navigate to that, it's just going to take us to a Google search. It's just not going to work. And if we go to this private IP address here, what's going to happen is that your computer is going to try and find it on your private network, and it's not going to find it. It's a private IP address. So just the same as you have computers connected to your private network, it'll be looking for this server that is connected to your private network, and it's actually not connected, so it's just going to hang there forever. And so there you can see it doesn't work. And so that's why you need to have a public IP address. So before we get build, I'm just going to terminate that and terminate. Okay, so that's shutting down now. So let's have a look at this now, and we'll have a bit of a play around with the VPC networking and see if we can get this thing to play up on us. Okay, so back in the VPC dashboard, what I want to do now is show you a little bit about route tables and the importance of having a route or a route table associated to the subnet that your EC2 instance is launched into, and having an entry in that route table that defines a route between that subnet and an internet gateway. And without that, you're not going to be able to connect to the wider internet. So I'll just go into this route tables part here and click on that route table. And there we can see is our default route table, which has got local traffic defined for our VPC, but it's also got traffic defined there for the wider internet going to our internet gateway. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete that. Now, a word of warning. This is a hands-on session where I'm playing around with a few things and showing you how things work. I don't expect you to do this yourself. It's not a hands-on lab. And the reason I haven't done this as a hands-on lab or as a lab rather than a hands-on session, is because when you play around with your default VPC, you can break it. And if you delete it, you'd have to ring up AWS support to get it back again. So just be careful when you're doing it. Make sure you follow on very carefully and not delete your VPC and not get it back again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that entry. So all of a sudden, the router in our VPC doesn't know how to direct traffic for the wider internet. It only knows how to do it for local traffic within the VPC. So if we go to the EC2 management console, and if we again go to that public DNS for our public IP website, and we open that up, okay, so it's still there. I forgot to click on save. Okay, so now saving that route table. So now, if I do that again, because I have saved the route table, and we go to that again, we will find that it just hangs there forever and eventually times out. Now, if we put that back again, so I'm just going to click on edit. I'm going to put it back on again. And I'll select that internet gateway. So all of a sudden, we've got our wider internet traffic going to our internet gateway. We know how to route that now. And I'll click on save this time. Okay, so that's saved. And now if we go to that DNS again, we've got our website back again, which is great. So when you're using VPC or you're launching an EC2 instance and you don't have your server up and running for whatever reason, your WordPress application or whatever it is, a few things you can check. Make sure that you've got a public IP address. That's a no-brainer. And make sure that you've got an internet gateway. You've got a route table associated with the subnet that you've launched your EC2 instance into, and make sure there's a route table entry that defines how to route traffic between that subnet and the internet gateway. So that's all I'll have to tell you for now about VPC. I hope you've learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing you in... Oh, hang on. Before we do that, we have to clean this up. So before I say goodbye, let's clean this up because we don't want to get a bill. So again, we'll go into here, into Actions, Instant State, and Terminate. Yes, terminate. Very important. Make sure we clean up after ourselves. So now I'll say goodbye, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.